Good morning. Happy Tuesday. We're here today with my very good friend and longtime colleague, David Shabazian, who's now like a super important person in the state of California. I mean, he was before, but now he really is because he's been appointed by the governor to be the Director of Conservation for the state of California, which is a really, really critical role. And we're all thrilled, those of us who've known David for a really long time, worked with him for so long, and especially those of us at Center for Land-Based Learning, because he was a board member for 8 years or maybe even more. He was our board chair for 3. He helped us really lead us into this new opportunity that we have now at the Maples and our new headquarters in Woodland. We were sorry to see him leave our board, but he obviously had really, really important things to do at the state. So David, it's great to see you this morning. We'll introduce you a little bit more in a bit. But because you are the chair, or head, whatever, of Department of Conservation, today's question for all of the staff is going to be simply, what is one word that kind of encompasses your definition, or what does conservation mean to you? So I'll start. I'm Mary Kimball. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Land-Based Learning, and I'm in Woodland. And to me, conservation means stewardship. So that's my one word for the day. And I'll move it over to Joseph. You're up next.
Good morning. My name is Joseph Montoya. I'm the Farms Leadership Coordinator for the Sacramento Valley. Sorry, it has to be 2 words. Not littering. As I mentioned before, I used to do a lot of rafting. And so, Sacramento can be windy, and if I, drop something on the floor, or if it doesn't get quite into the garbage can, I make sure it does, because otherwise it could, just blow right into the river, and then it just, makes something that I love to do not fun to do, because there would be garbage in the river, so not cool. So yeah, littering.
Not littering, right? Yeah. Very good. Okay, Katie.
Good morning. My name is Katie Wortman. I am the Central Valley Farms Leadership Coordinator, coming to you from Fresno. And in one word, conservation means to me is preservation. So as agriculturalists, we preserve our land, kind of like stewardship. And so we just love it.
That's it. That's right. All right, Romy.
Good morning. My name is Romy Wattenbarger. I'm the Kern County Farms Coordinator here in Bakersfield, and just like the others, mine would be protection. So I can go with anything, just protecting the nature, the wildlife, and like Joseph said, if you see trash, pick it up, or make sure you protect everything that we cherish.
Yes. And Letty, you're last today.
Good morning. My name is Letty Hernandez, and I run the program in Monterey and Santa Cruz counties. In one word, I'd say conservation is love. Just, loving the land, loving the animals, loving the way things move through the land. Yeah, that's it.
Perfect. That was a perfect around the horn today in California. So David, I did a little intro of you, and you can do your one word if you'd like.
Okay.
But yeah, go ahead, do your one word, and then
All right. My one word is prosperity. So if we don't have our resources, we don't have prosperity.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So we've hit on everything there with everybody today. So David is again, I like I said, I've known him for a long time. We've worked together for a long time, and he can introduce where he's from and how he grew up and his connection to agriculture, which is very strong. And my guess is that I don't know, this is one of the questions I want to ask you too when we get into it, David, but how many other folks within the Department of Conservation have a lot of ag background, and how that has helped you in this current role? But you were appointed by Governor Newsom last November?
Yeah.
Is that right?
October.
Yeah, October, right? And you started in the beginning of November. So it's kind of been a little crazy because there's a whole other thing that happened to you called COVID-19, but happened to all of us. So why don't you start with that intro of yourself and your background?
Well, yes, I was raised on a farm in the Central Valley, down in Stanislaus County. It was a small farm, and it wasn't our main source of income, but I did get to grow up on a farm. We mainly raised crops for the dairies that were kind of in our backyard, basically down the road from us. And so we were growing hay and grain, I got to learn basically, how to drive a tractor and how to plug holes in levees from the gophers and things like that. And so growing up on a farm, and we were surrounded by farmland. I also worked for other farms, and did things like, when you didn't have shakers, I would go out and knock. We called them almonds in Turlock. So I would knock almonds. I would knock walnuts, sweep them up or rake them up. I worked for Foster Farms for a while, so I actually worked on growing and harvesting turkeys and chickens. So I grew up in the heart of agriculture, and that's just always been kind of my my mindset. And then I went to UC Davis and got a degree in agricultural economics, which I then turned into basically doing land use. So I became very interested in how people make decisions about how to use land, and ended up working for the city of Davis after leaving UC Davis, and did land use planning for a while. And then I turned that land use planning experience into also looking at transportation planning. Got the job at SACOG, where we were putting the two together and trying to really explain to people how your decisions to travel are really based on how your communities are laid out. So you have to go from point A to point B. And when point A and point B are getting spread apart, you are going to travel more, you're going to tend to use your car more. And so I did a lot of work around understanding ways to hem in that growth and reduce the amount of travel as much as possible. And the byproduct of that was kind of coming back full circle to my background in roots and studies in agriculture and agricultural economics and planning, and looking at the byproduct or the benefit of trying to manage urban growth, which is that you are then conserving your resources. And in the Central Valley here, the main resources are agricultural land, but agricultural land doesn't operate in a vacuum. One of the main things that you need to have a farm is water. You need land, you need water, you need labor. You need a few other inputs to grow food. And so I started to broaden out my portfolio of planning to look at resource issues. And those resource issues were again, not just land, but everything that goes into that farm to make it work. And I ended up running a program called the Rural Urban Connection Strategy, which was a way for the Sacramento region to better understand the resources that it had, and it's very rich in natural resources, and to use those in ways that are sustainable and resilient and prosperous. And that became really the platform that I worked from, was that these resources are the underpinnings of economies. They are the starting point for a supply chain, in this case food, but also timber, even things like aggregate, which you need to build roads and buildings, and your communities are basically built on aggregate, but they're also built on food, they're built on water supply, and these are all resources that we need to be sustainable as a state. And as the #1 ag producer in the country, we need to make sure that those resources are well managed and stewarded and conserved so that we have them going forward. So that's just a quick kind of run through of my career path and where I started. It's kind of ironic that as a kid I wanted to get off of the farm, and I just came back to the farm. I'm not on the farm itself physically, but I'm doing everything in my power to support agriculture and resources in California. And And this role now as Director of Conservation is really a culmination of all that experience. And I just can't believe that I get to use all of that on a daily basis to help California manage its resources. So that's me.
Yeah. So I was going to say that this is all of those different pieces have come together, I think, probably really well, and you're utilizing them all on a daily basis. So tell us, Department of Conservation, where does it sit within the state of California's government, within all of the different agencies, and what does Department of Conservation do?
Okay. So the Department of Conservation is one of the main departments that sit under the Natural Resources Agency. Mm-hmm. So I report to the Secretary of Natural Resources, and he reports to the governor. So that's my chain of command. Mm-hmm. And in natural resources, as you would imagine, it's basically everything dealing with California's natural resources. So there's the Department of Fish and Wildlife, there's the Department of Water Resources, there's my department, Conservation, there's the California Conservation Corps, there's all of the main departments that work on resources sit under the Natural Resources Agency. And then the agency also oversees all of the conservation, the California conservation agencies or departments throughout the state of California, and different various boards and so forth that deal with resource issues. So I am one of the departments that sit in that agency. And then I work with other resource-related agencies and departments outside of the Natural Resources Agency. So this starts to get confusing, but so I work with, for example, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and I work with California Department of Food and Agriculture, and the California Air Resources Board, and basically any department or agency that has some role in the state's resources or air quality or quality of life or economic development is an agency that I ended up working with. And our mission and our goal is to conserve California's natural resources for today's needs and purposes, but also for the future. Mm-hmm. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we manage these resources well, we conserve as much as we can, so that we have it for what we need today, but also for future generations to also enjoy the prosperity and the wealth of resources that we have here in California.
So given all of that, how have you found so far that your background in agriculture is helping? I'm assuming is helping you. I'm hoping it's helping you with all of that coordination and with all of that collaboration, especially with CDFA, but like you were talking about the Air Resources Board, right. The water resources. I mean, I would assume, and I could be wrong, that a lot of folks don't have the agricultural background in the Department of Conservation, but maybe they do, and I just am misinformed. So how do you sit, and how do people see you with that background?
Well, I think it's been hugely valuable simply because, I grew up understanding that the land provides a service. And even though I didn't think of it that way as a kid, or maybe even in college, ultimately it is, I've been very lucky to actually literally get my hands dirty growing food, and that is really a service to California. And that it's done so that service is provided and that product is provided, and the economic development and the industry is all built upon the resources that we have and the way that we use them and manage them. And that perspective alone has helped me tremendously in talking with others about why we need to manage these resources. So my take on this has been a little different than I think a lot of people have had in the past about resource conservation, which is conservation for the sake of conservation. And it's important because, there's always been a perspective that our resources are important to have in the future, that, what we're enjoying today and being able to go out and recreate on the land and grow food from that land, has always been important to think about, but we've never put it into economic terms, basic dollars and cents and jobs created and the value of the industries that come from using our resources to drive value and jobs. And so that's I think what I've been able to bring to the table, growing up on a farm and also working in a lot of ag businesses, is that there's a ton of jobs that go along with or are a result of these basic industries of using resources to create a product. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just growing food, it's also timber production. It's taking minerals out of the ground and building cities with them, or finding gold, or the new gold in California is well, it's water for one, but also yeah, it's always it's always going to be valuable, and in fact you really don't have economies without water, so it's a really important resource. But also things like, California has a lot of rare earth elements that go into things like your iPhone and your computer. And California has a lot of lithium, which goes into the batteries that run your iPhone and your, the Teslas on the road. So it's understanding the starting point for these supply chains and these industries are built on resources. And these are really valuable supply chains, and they create a lot of jobs in California. In fact, there was a study done recently by the University of California, the Ag and Natural Resources Division. Mm-hmm. They put a value on working landscapes and the supply chains coming from working landscapes at $333 billion a year. Mm-hmm. And it employs something like 80,000 people in California. So that's nothing to sneeze at. That's a pretty big industry. And they did not even count the value of what are called ecosystem services. So flood control and water supply and things that we take for granted, but are hugely important to us to maintain our quality of life and just to be sustainable as communities. They didn't even put a value on that, and still $333 billion a year in value from these supply chains built off of or built from natural resources. So that's, coming again from a farm and working in agriculture, truly like, having paychecks depend on, resource management, gave me, a good starting point to talk about resources in this way. And so it's conservation for the sake of conservation, but it's also conservation for the sake of creating jobs and value in California.
It's interesting, David. I'm a big California history buff.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books is Up and Down California by William Henry Brewer. Mm-hmm. And Brewer was a member of the Whitney Survey. People have heard the Whitney Survey, but really it was this gentleman who was a botanist from the East Coast, from New York, I believe, who went literally up and down California for 4 years. And this was right after California had become a state. Mm-hmm. They had no idea what was here. Mm-hmm. The goal was for him to discover what resources were here, right? Yeah. And so it's very interesting, 100 and however many years later, 70 years later, here we are today. California is still an incredibly rich state in many ways, but especially in resources. And it's always about how do we best use those resources for today and for the future. And I just think about all of the different opportunities that you must see daily for jobs, for our young people as they move forward and they're thinking about what the opportunities. I know you were working a ton on climate change projects before COVID. I don't know what's going on now, but I think of if you are in high school now or you're in college now and the kinds of opportunities to really change the way we work and do things here. Right. And you kind of talked about that a little bit when you first started, like I can really make a difference here. Yeah. And I just wonder if you can just kind of, there are some questions and I want to get to those, but expand upon that a bit about where you are now and the people that you are working with. Mm-hmm. So talented and just with such a great vision of what California can continue to be like, if not better.
Yeah.
And just a little bit about that, because I think it's very motivating for people who are looking to that future in a kind of a crazy time right now.
Yeah, well, Mary, that's a great question, and that's at the crux to why this job is so important to me, and why, I still pinch myself on a daily basis that I was asked to take this job, and that I was appointed by the governor, because one, we have a governor, we have a legacy of recent governors that have we've been shifting more and more toward looking at resources in California more strategically, because frankly, we have had an impact on them to the point that some systems are starting to break down, and so we have really had to take a look at them if we're going to be sustainable as a state and maintain all of these great jobs and economies that we've built off of these resources. We're hitting a point in time where our impact on the landscape, coupled with climate change, is really pushing the boundaries of what we can draw from these resources sustainably. And I think the one that really tipped us over, that got us thinking a lot more strategically, is the wildfires throughout California, and the fact that these undermanaged forests have resulted in these really catastrophic wildfires, which then impact the watersheds, as we talked about earlier, and those watershed impacts then translate into water supply concerns for agriculture and for our communities. So that's just one example of the reach of how these jobs support our state. And this governor, I think, has taken a really strong stance on understanding and putting people in place to manage California's natural resources in a way that, again, it's not just about managing the landscape, but also realizing that there's these tremendous job opportunities. And his appointment of the Secretary of Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, same thing. I mean, the guy really has a really great perspective on what it is to be a Californian, to be here, and to manage this unique bundle of resources that we have. So, moving forward on that, it's important for us to always keep in perspective that what we have here is really unique. And in order to keep us in the vanguard of being able to be, the top ag producer in the United States and fifth largest economy in the world, and to basically continue to use these resources to keep California, vibrant, high quality of life, and resilient, we need people to manage that. And in my department, we have engineers and geologists and economists and planners, and they're all supported by accountants and admin staff and administrators. And this is again where agriculture, there's jobs that you wouldn't think are agricultural jobs, but Mary and I were talking before the session got started today that I have almost 200 geologists, which, by the way, CGS started with Whitney. CGS is the California Geological Survey, and their first role was to go out and find gold in California so that we could mine the gold and use it to help the economy in California. California Geological Survey still does that. They go out and they find where the aggregate is, they find where the gold is, they find where the silver is, the copper, the lithium, the rare earth elements, and then that's the start of a supply chain that then the engineers and others go in and they figure out ways to get it out, and then we use it for our communities. So geologists also have a role in agriculture because they're the ones who also understand where to put the water underground to store it for use going forward. Economists are important because they help us understand how supply and demand works and how value chains work. And those markets are what drive demand for things like food and timber. I could almost go through every, industry or discipline out there, and it's related to agriculture in one way or another. we have attorneys that basically tell us what the law says you can and cannot do with resources. And, that's an important role in supporting the agricultural industry. And we have, I mentioned our accountants who run the Department of Conservation, but you also need an accountant to help you run your business as a farmer. So it's like the list is almost nonstop. I mean, this is an industry. This is an industry that uses resources to drive the values in the supply chains. But as an industry, you need not only people who are an expert in the resource that you're using or the product that you're producing, but just simply what it takes to run a business. And so, agriculture encompasses all of that. And then, of course, there's education, right? So none of these people can do their jobs if they don't have access to education. And so that's where I see, Center for Land-Based Learning sits right in the middle of all of that, which is, creating, I like to think of this in terms of infrastructure, because I'm an economist, so I think of things in these really clinical terms. But you need, yeah, that's right, spreadsheets. But you need infrastructure to make industries run. But one of the most important pieces of infrastructure is people. And so, Center for Land-Based Learning is squarely in the people supply chain, so to speak, of helping folks understand the opportunities, and then use that to always, at least, even if they don't go into agriculture or something in land management, that it's in the back of your mind. You actually know now what is going on the landscape and where your food comes from, where your water comes from. All of that is really important to understand and gives you context for whatever it is you're doing in the future.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, we had Shiva says her voice is hoarse, but I will ask this first question for her. Okay. Shiva is a student at Sacramento High School, and she was in the Farms program, and she also is one of our 1,000 Strong interns. And so I think this is a really good question, because as you know, we have a lot of students who come from urban areas and who are, as she says, Black and brown. So she said, in your line of work, is there a large population of Black and brown women? Which I think is a great question.
Yep, that is a good question. And I would say not as much as other demographics, but it's actually growing. And to me, that's a really positive sign that what has not been traditionally a field that Black and brown women have gone into, we're seeing more and more of that. And again, that's, I think, a nod and a compliment to education, to outreach, and getting folks to understand that, in fact, there's this whole industry. It's incredibly interesting. It's incredibly rewarding, and it's profitable, right? There's jobs there. You can make a really good living, working on managing and stewarding our natural resources, and in this case, growing food. But there's some really amazing and rewarding work there that you have to get exposed to it, which Farms does in particular, and then understand that there are a lot of careers that, even if you're not out in the field getting your hands dirty, there are a lot of careers that support all of these resources and the industries that come from them.
Mm-hmm. So Shiva also had a pretty funny question I'm going to ask you, because I know you and you can handle this. Not to intrude, but are you rich, or do you have secret agents like government officials?
No, not rich. Government is a great job, and I'm really proud of. I mean, I spent my whole career in government. But government is not where you go to get rich. But it's where you go to enrich your life. If you make a commitment to public service, which I have done, I think it's that in and of itself is very rewarding and enriching, because now in my vantage, I get to help the whole state of California, not just the Sacramento region where I was working before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hugely rewarding. So, you know, it's, you could chase the dollars, or you can chase the mission, and I'm chasing the mission.
Mm-hmm. That very well done, switching that question around. I knew you could handle it. So let's see, there is also a question. So Mia, I see your question, and let me just ask it for you. So she was wondering if you had cattle on your farm. I think it was because you were talking about dairies.
Oh, right. No, we did not, but behind us was a pig farm. And then, but we were surrounded by dairies. And so down in Stanislaus County, in the area that I grew up in, there were a lot of dairies. And so that's why we grew hay and grain, because it was feed for those dairies that were around us.
You know what? I want you to tell your story about your dad's vegetable garden,
yeah,
and how that helped you go to college, because both Shiva and Mia, I think, would really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really neat story, and tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure. So we had about 50 acres, and my dad carved off about an acre of that. And at first it was much smaller than that. It wasn't even a quarter acre, but he was basically just growing food for us.
Mm-hmm.
But we would have friends come by, and he would give them, you know, some vegetables and some fruit. And eventually, you know, I don't know how he latched onto this, but he started selling fruits and vegetables. We had a very small farm stand, but then he started expanding the acreage that he committed to, you know, growing a pretty high diversity of fruits and vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a farm stand, and the farm stand was profitable enough that that's what my dad used to pay for me to go to UC Davis to get a degree in agricultural economics. So it's just kind of interesting that this.
And you had to work at the farm stand.
I did, yeah. I worked at the farm.
You didn't get it just for free. You had to.
No. And you know, but then when I was coming home from college, that's when I was working for Foster Farms in the summertime, because my parents said, you know, you can't work here. You need to go somewhere. You need to go work for a business.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, because, you know, back then, Turlock was a smaller community. We knew people who worked at Foster Farms, and I was able to basically, they helped me get a job. And so I spent my summers working at Foster Farms. So one summer I built turkey houses, and one summer I did a production study for the chicken processing facility in Livingston. And, you know, that's where I was able to basically, you know, really get a grasp of not only being on a farm and what it takes to grow food, but then, you know, again, this supply chain, that there's all these jobs that are built on top of just growing the food. You then have to aggregate it, you have to process it, you have to distribute it, you have to do marketing, you have to do sales and retail. And, you know, again, I'm coming back to, you know, there are all these jobs that are related to resources, and they support resources in one way or another. You know, you can't sell food if you don't have a market to sell that food into. So the person who's got a grocery store or is an aggregator, they're as important to the supply chain and to the farmer as the consumer is. I mean, you have to have all of these pieces working in order to then have an industry that starts with, you know, having healthy soil, having a water supply, having a farmer grow that food. Right, having, you know, a seed salesman sell, you know, that particular input to the farm. You know, all the pieces have to fit together in order for this to all work. And, you know, so I'm coming back to that, you know, you don't have to get your hands dirty to be in the industry, or to at least support the industry. It's important for you to understand, you know, just start with an understanding of what it takes to get food on a plate. And then if you want to be in that, you know, what part of that is interesting and exciting to you?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you can make a difference in any part of that system.
Yeah. Perfect, David. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you've got lots of things going on, and I know there's going to be, I can't even imagine the changes of things that in your world right now with regards to the budget and things you're planning on doing now probably not able to do for the moment. But I know that one of the things you and I had talked about prior to COVID was an hopefully exciting opportunity, and I'm sure that it will still happen in workforce development, in natural resources in California that we can work on together, and that we can continue to help, students like Shava and others enter into this. She said, by the way, she responded and said, "Yay, glad to see the growth." So, I think that we can continue to work on, and I know we will, when we emerge from this and find ways to keep working on the things we love about education and experiential learning and workforce development. But I think that students, listening to this should really take a look at Department of Conservation, take a look at the website, look at all of the different things that are happening at the state level, and all of the different opportunities that David was referring to within the very wide umbrella of resources. There is something there for everyone, there's hopefully going to be programs in the future that will continue to help to introduce a lot of these careers for the Department of Conservation.
Yep. I mean, the sky's the limit, really. I mean, if you think even, about how the technology in the industry is changing, and, the use of robotics and, data and, broadband and Wi-Fi, and how farmers are now connecting into these remote services. They, I mean, there's just a whole, branch of technology that goes into, agriculture and land management. So, again, think outside the box, and you will always find a path back to your resources and how important they are and how you fit into that.
Great. That's a great way to end. Thank you, David. Thanks for being with us this morning and Coffee with the Farmer Resource Manager, because you're the top resource manager, or one of the tops at this point, which is pretty great. Thank you again, and hopefully we can see each other soon. Come to the new headquarters, get a tour.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
All righty. Take care.
Right.
We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.